The estimates are that over the next 10 years or so, the need for investment in sustainability is at about $2.5 trillion. So the challenge is particularly significant. That's why we've got to look at innovative ways in which we can bring capital to bear, bring skills to bear on trying to deal with these SDGs.
Leila Fani always says that ladies first, so I'm going to start with you. You've recently taken up this role as CEO of the JSE, following in big steps as well. And at the same time, you've moved countries and you've taken on this commitment to not only being one of the CEOs on the UN GISD, but you're actually a co-chair. Why did you personally see that as an important thing to do?
On the personal side, I very much relate to the millennials, where your value system needs to resonate with the company for which you work. And my personal value system is very much that I spend as much of my personal time when I'm not working in the bush, in mountains, climbing and mountaineering. And so climate change is a profoundly important value system for me. In addition to that, social issues also play a very big role in my value system. So there's a personal component that resonates. I think if we take a commercial lens on this, just like technology, people always tend to overestimate the impact of climate change and social issues in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. And I think that we've seen a hockey stick reaction and attraction and focus on issues of climate change and general ESG and sustainability. And so the JSE has always placed a very high priority on sustainability. When I was involved with the JSE between 2002 and 2004, when I was consulting to them, we launched our first sustainable index, and we were the first exchange in the world to do so. So this has been a very important part of who we are, and in the recent past, it's become a very important commercial driver for financial flows and particularly for the JSE. I'm very grateful to have a committed partner in Fani, and we're working very closely together on our national agenda and also on how we influence and use our influence and our convening power that our roles give us to further the sustainability agenda.
Can you explain just what that sustainability agenda is?
So the sustainability agenda is really, and you'll hear the ESG components loosely referenced, and that's really about the environment, the social agenda, and the governance agenda. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and these all center on those three components, things like alleviating or removing poverty completely, things like focusing on inequity and imbalance, social inequality. Given that our country has the highest Gini coefficient, one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world, this is a very important and very relevant component for us.
Fani, it's your turn now. I came to you about 10 months ago with this. You grabbed it with two hands and said yes immediately. Why? Why was it so important for you and for Investec for you to take up this role?
Most people who know Investec will always know that we talk about living in society and not of society. So it is fundamentally important commercially to us to see progress in society, because that way we are able to sustain our business. At a personal level, having lived in a shack not more than 30 or so years ago, it really is important that we as a business take very centrally the issue of sustainable development. So at Investec, it is core to who we are, core to our philosophies and values, and core to our commercial success. So both commercially and personally, this is what is particularly important to us.
So I'm going to take you in some deeper water here, Fani.
Let's go there.
Yeah, well, the goals are ambitious. To solve for poverty, hunger, unemployment, inequality is no simple task. And here we are sitting in South Africa where solving for those problems is immense. But at the same time, we have to solve for climate. What gives? Something's got to give.
I think the way we look at the 17 SDGs is that they are interconnected. If you talk about climate change, it affects economic growth, it affects our ability, as an example, in South Africa to be successful agriculturally. So we look at them as interconnected, but from a corporate perspective, we have decided to choose 6 SDGs and focus on them. Education being one of them. You've talked about the provision of water. You cannot attack one without influencing the achievement on another. So we encourage corporates to focus on those SDGs that are most relevant to them. The estimates are that over the next 10 years or so, the need for investment in sustainability is at about $2.5 trillion. So the challenge is particularly significant. That's why we've got to look at innovative ways in which we can bring capital to bear, bring skills to bear on trying to deal with these SDGs. The Secretary General of the UN, His Excellency Mr. Gutierrez, thought that bringing together a group of leading CEOs from across the world and bestowing them with the convening power of the United Nations, that they would be able to catalyze, to bring capital, and to also bring skills to bear on the challenge. So the challenge is massive, the time is limited, but the SDGs are interrelated. As an example, in South Africa, while inequality is a big issue, while economic growth and issues of energy are pretty primary, we can see, though, the impacts of climate change. In the Eastern Cape, we have seen significant droughts. In the Western Cape, in recent times, we have seen significant droughts. In KwaZulu-Natal, we have seen significant storms that impacted communities in a great way. So while climate change may not seem to be at the top end of our agenda, it remains an issue that affects us on a day-to-day basis. As Leila said, sometimes in the short term, we do not quite appreciate the impact of the risks and the dangers that face the Earth. But in the long term, these issues are particularly real.
Yeah, and I guess that's the challenge, balancing the short-term focus with that long-term vision. Leila, the JSE has done a lot for sustainability over the years. What is the role of the JSE in terms of opening up the market for sustainable development?
There are 2 key areas. The first is on governance, and the second is on stimulating the market and ensuring that we are able to capture and provide products that enable sustainable investment. It's estimated that around 35% of assets are being directed towards sustainable investments. Most of the people in the room, I'm sure, would have heard about the largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock, and Larry Fink, who is the CEO, in his letter quite recently, very unambiguously indicating the importance of sustainable development. We saw Goldman Sachs recently saying that they won't be arranging any listings if there are no females on boards. So I think very rapidly what we're seeing in terms of the capital formation and flows of funds is that sustainable development is becoming a genuine and very real magnet or attraction. So it's our role to ensure that we unlock that new flow of capital, and that we become potentially global leaders, particularly insofar as the emerging markets go. We launched green bonds 2.5 years ago. We will be announcing tomorrow that we are going to be launching social bonds and sustainable bonds. And social bonds and sustainable bonds are really debt-funded instruments that enable social project funding. We are also working on a social impact bond, and if we get this right, that will be the first in the world to be listed. There are impact bonds that are funded in the private space. And effectively what an impact bond does is that the terms and conditions are linked to the impact to the economy or the impact to the social environment rather than just simple objectives. And so it'll be about how many people did you reach in building schools in certain rural areas, for example. So there'll be a quantifiable impact that is defined as a target. So we are also very heavily focused in the sustainable investment indices. In fact, and I know that the purists would probably cringe at this, but our social responsibility index with FTSE has outperformed our two benchmark indices over the last 3 years. Now, those indices are compiled differently, and so it's difficult to compare mathematically appropriately, but nonetheless, I think it's really important to realize that there is economic benefit that is flowing from these sorts of listings. Insofar as the governance goes, the JSE has been a global leader around transparency relating to sustainable goals. We introduced a number of measures whereby boards were required to disclose gender and race equality on boards. They're also required to disclose remuneration policies. Where this might head in the future, and particularly in our role in chairing the GISD, is to use our convening power to engage with other exchanges and ensure that we have a globally equivalent approach to transparency, to measuring sustainability, so that you avoid what the so-called greenwashing, or companies who are reporting that they're sustainable, but when you actually dig deep into exactly what it is they're doing, it's very far from sustainable. So there is a role that we have to play to ensure that the governance and transparency drives a consciousness, it drives measurement, and therefore it drives action.
So you've mentioned gender a couple of times. The recent World Economic Forum Gender Gap report came out with quite a sobering message. It said that neither this nor the next generation of women are likely to experience gender parity in their lifetime. How do we fix that? What do we need to do?
So the stats indicate that if you extrapolate the difference between what men are paid and what women are paid, that it'll take between 200 and 250 years to close the gap. I would argue that the future is definitely female, and that in the same way that you're seeing a much stronger consciousness on climate change, equally you're seeing a focus on gender parity. Interestingly, having been in Australia for 3 years and moving back, I think that as a country we are way ahead of many of our global peers, and particularly in the developed world, in empowering women and appointing women to senior roles. Are we where we need to be? If we look at the number of females in CEO roles, less than 5 on the JSE, in fact, a lot less than 5. I think we have a long way to go. Unfortunately, there's a conscious bias that people enact in their succession planning, in how they promote people, and people tend to hire in their likeness. consciously or unconsciously. And so until we get more senior women on boards and in CEO roles, you're not going to see that transformation happening. It's an unfortunate thing that gender pay parity is as severe as it is. But I believe that transparency will be an important trigger because there is a strong social consciousness in both the customers as well as employees. And those companies who demonstrate that they are taking pay parity by way of example, or gender equality or general equality seriously, will attract top talent, and particularly in the future of the economy, which is in the millennial phase.
And we're seeing that very result here at Investec, so we agree with you on that. Fani, the very existence of the Global Investors for Sustainable Development means that there's either a lack of funding, or there's a lack of interest or appetite from investors, or there's a lack of viable projects. What is it?
Look, I think the risk around climate change has always been in the horizon, but the urgency around it is now at our door. So there has been a lack of urgency around these issues of sustainability. There has been a lack of action on behalf of governments, on behalf of corporates. But as we were at Davos this year, there was a level of interest and commitment that has not been seen in quite a long time in matters around sustainability. Shareholders and asset owners are showing significant interest in this area. In fact, as we go forward, the commercial opportunity around investing in sustainability will really drive a lot of progress with respect to capital coming into these areas. Obviously, there needs to be a level of facilitation for capital to move into sustainable projects. As you will know, at Investec, we are in the process, for instance, of launching an equity fund that would look to invest in renewable projects, creating a level of liquidity for developers and bringing capital from developed markets specifically through instruments that are tradable on the stock exchanges. So those types of innovative solutions to attract more capital, to create instruments that allow collective investment schemes to be able to invest and also allow capital to move into development projects.
And of course, you need the enabling environment. So there's a lot of collaboration across many parties.
As the Secretary General of the United Nations likes to say, to attack the biggest problems in the world, you need a level of collaboration across many stakeholders. You need governments, for instance, to be urgent in their policy formulation. In South Africa, if our policy formulation and implementation had been much more urgent, we would have been able to invest more in renewable energy. We have now a new integrated policy around energy that will allow, as an example, large corporates to invest in their own generation. That will allow more urgent investment in renewables, for instance. If you get policymakers and you get the financial players like banks, insurance companies, asset managers, and you have developers cooperating, I think that collaboration will lead to much more progress. And of course, you also do need civil society to be active.
Thank you, Fani. Thank you, Leila. I think it's clearly time to stop talking and start doing. They're talking about this being the decade of action. And I think that's truly what the GISD is all about. It's about really mobilizing swift action and starting to see results, starting to see tangible impacts. And of course, it comes back to that very important point you made, Fani, about collaboration across all stakeholders. And the most important thing is we all have a role to play. Doesn't matter what business you're in, doesn't matter what area you're in, doesn't matter who you are, how high up you are, how low you are, everyone has a role to play. So thank you for your participation.